Welcome to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast.
Welcome back to A Fork in Time, everyone, the alternate history podcast. It's Dylan again in the host chair, although I have a feeling you won't hear a ton of me in this episode like you usually do. I've got an expanded crew with me today. We had to knock the trunk out of the Wayback Machine and duct tape some more chairs in there so we could fit everybody. In no particular order, I have Evan Buck on the screen.
Hey, everyone. How's it going? It's your boy, Evan.
We've got regular contributors from our Discord, some friends of the podcast. I've got Helena Nash joining us from all the way across the pond in the UK.
Hello there.
We've got another friend from Discord and a friend of Evan's, Kai. Say hello.
Hey, thank you for having me on. It's been a long time listener, and I'm happy to be able to contribute.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. And last, but certainly not least,
That's
the man
just
himself.
You know what you're going to get if you call me.
Oh, my. He didn't even. The one time you didn't leave me hanging, you had to cut me off. Chris Coppola, everyone. You do have to say your phrase. You know that, right?
Good people.
All right. It's officially an episode of the podcast. We're all here. So I'm going to hand off the introductory duties for the fork to Evan. Evan, what do we have on the docket for today?
Yeah, so we are going to be taking the 5-seater edition of the Wayback Machine, not really too far back. We're going back to 1977. And this, if you have just totally, decided not to read the title of the podcast or the description of it at all, you have no idea what we're discussing. This is more of a pop culture episode that we're going to be talking about today. A lot of times on this podcast, we focus on these big, massive, epochs of history and generals and presidents being assassinated and battles and everything. But every once in a while, we do like to occasionally dip our toes into a little bit more of the whimsical side of things. So this is one of those more whimsical episodes. And we're going to be talking about a very famous movie and its development, Saturday Night Fever. There's a lot of interesting backstory to this movie and how it was created. And Chris, I'm actually going to say right now, the article that I have at the top of my notes from Vanity Fair is a great article I'd love to have in the show notes as an inspiration for a part of the inspiration for the fork. So, but one of the main things that the movie is known for is its iconic soundtrack. And the Bee Gees, pretty famous bands that a lot of our listeners are probably aware of. Some of their songs like Night Fever, Staying Alive, How Deep Is Your Love. Those songs were actually created in a very unique set of circumstances. The producers of the movie Saturday Night Fever were unable to get the rights to certain songs from Stevie Wonder and Boz Scaggs. And Boz Scaggs actually is a musician who he refused to participate in this movie because he was holding out hope that he would be able to participate in another different disco movie project, which never actually happened. So his production company refused to give the rights to allow his songs to appear in the movie. And interestingly enough, John Travolta was actually in the initial screenings of the movie or in the initial shoots, he danced to songs from Stevie Wonder and Boz Scaggs. So last minute, the producers of Saturday Night Fever, and Robert Stigwood in particular, he had a good working relationship with the Bee Gees band. But at this point in the Bee Gees timeline, things weren't going super great for them. They got pretty famous earlier on in like the late 60s timeframe. Quick fame and riches can put some strains on the group. They were a group of 3 brothers, I believe. Probably the most famous product to ever be exported from the Isle of Man. But they were also more well known for being from Australia because that's where they ended up moving to in their childhood. So they were kind of a little bit on a little bit of a downturn for the band at this point of their career. And so in our timeline, we have the producer of the movie, Robert Stigwood, calling him up and saying, "Hey, I really need you guys to help me out here. I need a soundtrack for this disco movie. Can you guys help me out?" And the Bee Gees were in the midst of trying to record another album at this point. They were trying to resuscitate their career, and they thought about saying no, but instead they decided to take a weekend binger, record a few songs, write, record, produce, all of it in a whirlwind. And those songs that they ended up making became fixtures in American pop culture. They are arguably some of the most iconic songs of the late 70s, and they were probably part of the most memorable parts of the Saturday Night Fever movie. So, in our timeline, we are going to be discussing on this podcast, what if the Bee Gees music never ended up coming to fruition? And we'll be discussing, kind of more in detail what exactly that fork would look like. But essentially, the fork we're going to be looking at today is, what if Saturday Night Fever did not, in fact, end up having the Bee Gees music in it for one reason or another, whether the Bee Gees refused to work on the movie or the right situation got sorted out with Wonder and Skaggs, any of those sorts of details.
Frankly, in my mind, this starts with the brothers going full Gallagher, like turning into it.
Yeah, I was gonna mention the Gallaghers as well.
Yeah. So with that set up as the fork, let's talk about the specifics of where we think this is going to go. What do we think is most likely? Do we think the Bee Gees are going to go Gallagher and just decide not to go, produce music for whatever reason? Do we think the right situation gets fixed or sorted out? Maybe both of them happen at the same time. What do we think is most likely here?
If you're asking me, Evan, I think
it's an open question. Anybody can answer.
For my two penneth, which is a British phrase you can look up later, is that the Gibbs, the Bee Gees, they don't go for it. They've got something else on the go. There are other options. One things that they've always done is they're very flexible, they're very adaptable, and you'll see that in their later work. They've turned their hand to lots of different genres. There's no guarantee that they thought, hey, let's do 5 pieces of music for disco, which is on its way out right now. I think there's every possibility to say, did you know we're going to work on this other thing. I don't know what the other thing is. Or they just have a really nice weekend in the chateau in France that they'd rented, and they don't kill themselves writing 5 songs in a weekend. And that's the legend, right?
Well, and weren't they recording another album when they got this deal? Like they basically were kind of farting around with songs anyway, and they got the call and they were like, "Oh, okay, well, we'll just do this instead."
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think another important thing to note, which is what we talked about a little bit in the pre-discussion, was that this film was already made. And indeed, the John Travolta, when he's dancing, when they're shooting, he's dancing to music by other artists, not the Bee Gees. So if they, if the Bee Gees say no, it seems to me eminently likely that there'll be something else that'll take its place, and that it's just that's kind of a non-starter. The movie's getting made whether the Bee Gees are in it or not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. And I think this is something that will kind of be a theme that permeates a lot through this fork and what ends up happening with a Bee Gees less timeline for Saturday Night Fever is the Bee Gees were able to make their music and make their songs with the themes of the movie in mind. A lot of what had happened initially in production, where they took already existing songs from other artists and choreographed the dance moves and all of that, part of production at that stage. So that has, I think, a very large impact on the cultural impact of the film and its relative staying power. Now, in the pre-discussion, all of us kind of, got on board with this interpretation. And as we discussed it is, we don't think that the movie is going to become like some sort of massive flop or commercial failure or whatever as a result of there not being any Bee Gees involved. But this is kind of like asking to take the score of John Williams out of Star Wars. Like if you, and I watched the movie about a week ago in preparation for this discussion. It's all throughout the movie at some of the most important, iconic scenes, most memorable parts of the movie. Right at the beginning of the film, you have John Travolta strutting down the street in Brooklyn to Staying Alive. I cannot imagine another song there. And that's kind of part of what's difficult about this fork is that the Bee Gees music is so important and iconic that it is difficult to imagine this movie with the cultural impact that it had having other music in play. That being said, Saturday Night Fever is going to go on. It was already mostly finished by the time the Bee Gees, make their music. So it's still going to be in theaters. It's still going to be released. I think one of the biggest things that happened as a result of their not being involved is we do not know the movie as Saturday Night Fever. If you look back into the development of the movie was mainly based off of an article that was written like a few years back. I think it was called something like Tribal Rights of the New Saturday Night, something like that. And that's what they actually wanted to originally call the movie. I can't imagine that title working out as well because I'm picturing in my head, the movie poster with John Travolta, and it's just very simple, very clean logo, Saturday Night Fever. I can't imagine all of these little tiny words, tribal rights of the Saturday night, whatever, blah, blah, blah. It just doesn't work as well. So they ended up almost going with a different title that was just purely Saturday Night. The Bee Gees weren't as keen on this. They had made a song called Night Fever, and they're like, well, hey, Saturday night isn't as descriptive, and it's not quite as, it's like saying Friday night, me and the boys hanging out on Friday night. Like it's too generic. It doesn't really have a lot of selling power to it. So they're like, why not call it Saturday Night Fever? Because we already have a song called Night Fever. Why not just incorporate that? So the movie probably would have ended up being called Saturday Night. And I think that actually has a pretty big impact on, the relative marketability of the movie, the relative staying power of the movie, really what makes it as memorable as it was.
Yeah.
That Vanity Fair article that I think it's the one that you make reference to, Evan, has an interesting line where they talk about the movie and how its image is altered by the fact that the Bee Gees have thrown in these very upbeat, exciting, arresting songs. It says, Saturday Night Fever is a sexual assault-filled profane character study about outsiders living sad, sordid lives on the fringes of society. But because it will forever be associated with John Travolta swaggering down the street to the insistent throb of the Bee Gees staying alive, we think of it differently than, say, Taxi Driver, even if Saturday Night Fever is only marginally less depressing. So I wonder if the Bee Gees are absent from this film, and it depends on who takes their place, might we instead associate this film with a darker and less upbeat aura than it is in the canonical timeline?
Yeah, no, that's actually an incredibly salient point. We remember and we think of Saturday Night Fever as full of swagger, full of confidence, full of bravado. Me having watched the movie last week, I can tell you right now, 80% of the movie is depressing. Like it's a pretty sad movie, actually, when you really watch and understand its themes. But we all remember the Bee Gees and Travolta tearing it up on the dance floor. So what you actually remember the movie for in our timeline is probably very different to what we remember it for in this alternate timeline. We probably remember it as much more of the grittier, sort of movie that it really is. Lowdown was the Boz Scaggs song that they were really hoping to get into the movie. I listened to that for, again, in preparation of this podcast. And, no disrespect to Boz and his body of work and to the song Lowdown. It's a good song. But again, it's a song that was written not with the movie's themes in mind. So it's hard for me to imagine, but they choreographed it and his dance moves to that song, one of the songs they choreographed it to. So I'm sure it would have worked. I'm sure it would have been okay. But would it have propelled, to the superstardom levels that we saw in our timeline? I don't think so.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think so either. I think adding the Bee Gees in is the magic pixie dust on this movie. It's the bits that stay with us, those of us that saw it at the time, decades later. Take them out and add in some existing music, good as it is. It's more of a jukebox movie, I know it was contemporary, but it makes me think a little bit more like American Graffiti. So, look, that's great. They're playing that music. Oh, that reminds me of. Again, I watched a great documentary in preparation for the recording today, and I'd forgotten the suicides, the rape, the just unhappy family life, and the violence. All I remember is Travolta on the floor and the music, and that's what 95% of us probably remember. So yeah, they are the magic pixie dust that elevates Night Fever from a good film to an iconic movie. And it did them no harm either. Incidentally, Bee Gees did very well out of it.
I mean,
you take them out.
Yeah, their career was revitalized after this.
Right.
They
Again,
became the disco band. They were they defined it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Basically, them and Donna Summers carried disco for like 6 months after this before everybody caught the train.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
100%. And I mean, that's actually bringing up a really good point too, because I kind of want to get back to like what would have happened to some of the actors, Travolta in particular, should this movie not be as successful. Because I think, Helena, you had some really interesting thoughts on that. But let's focus on the musical side first, because disco was we credit this movie for kind of like kicking off disco as a genre. It did not. It was an already existing genre that was already kind of on its way out. Detect a commonality of themes here. We have the Bee Gees kind of on their way out. We have disco on the way out. So throw them together and boom, now they're resurrected. Now they're revived. But disco as a genre was kind of a very niche sort of thing, kind of confined to, very like metropolitan areas at clubs in the United States. With this movie, it becomes a massive international phenomenon. What do we think happens with disco outside of, no Bee Gees in Saturday Night Fever? And by the way, I'm just going to throw this in here as well. I have often caught myself many times almost saying Saturday Night Live. I don't know if that's something you guys have noticed, but because they share the same first two words, I'm like, Saturday Night Fever.
Also, just to say, we might have to look up exactly when, but this was also like the birth of Saturday Night Live as well.
Yeah,
like,
this is like within a year or two.
Yeah.
Also, this might just
is
be
basically. No, go ahead, Kai.
This is a totally trivial and vacuous point, but I was just going to say it bothers me ever so slightly that they missed the alliteration of Friday Night Fever when Friday night would also serve as a weekend evening. Friday Night Fever it sounds better to me personally, but that just slightly bothers me.
But then what are you going to make what's the football show called?
True. Very good point, Chris.
Monday Night Lights.
No, okay.
I just got a visceral reaction from Chris out of that.
I realize you were a band nerd. High school Friday night is football, period.
For high schools that have good football teams.
Yeah, there you go.
Not for Evan in my high school.
Yeah, same, right? I do think there's one interesting thing, kind of to sidestep what happens to disco. This kind of goes there, and this kind of is going to go somewhere a little wider. I do think there's a really interesting thing about what happened with the recording of, I think it was Saturday Night, Staying Alive, the song, and not one of the other ones. So when the Bee Gees were recording this suite of songs, they were in the middle of tooling around with some other songs for an album they were working on, and they had a session drummer. They were in France at a chateau somewhere, and they had a studio session drummer who was with them. Well, he had a death in the family and had to leave, so they didn't finish recording Staying Alive with this drummer, but he had recorded kind of a demo track just for them to kind of test out. And long story short, the Bee Gees, instead of using a different drummer because they couldn't find one, they took 2 bars, so 8 beats of this drum track, and they just looped it. And
Yeah.
so I think it may not even have been a conscious thing for musicians of the time, but I think the use of that drum loop probably had a significant impact on subsequent evolution of electronic dance music for one, but also drums in particular, because the 80s, a lot of Michael Jackson's album and some of the poppier dance stuff of the 80s is really when you start seeing drum machines blow up. Like Kanye West literally has an album called 808s and Heartbreak, and the 808 was like the first like god tier drum machine that everybody in the late 80s used. So I wonder if the Bee Gees not being in the picture might somehow either delay or alter the kind of subsequent evolution, not just of disco, but also of kind of electronic-y, repetitive 4 on the floor dance music overall.
By the way, the only thing going through my mind is, wait, did Pete Best miss out again?
Oh my goodness.
It's such a good and interesting point, though, because again, one of the defining characteristics of disco music is that 4 on the floor, very
it's just that
beat,
that everything it's
may have just circumstantially arisen because they couldn't find a drummer.
Yeah,
that it became defining.
Yeah, the only other music that really is like that is funk. Like George Clinton, the bassist from Parliament, famously, this is, as a guitar player, this is one of my favorite things to say that I know about the bass, because it shows I know nothing about the bass. But according to George Clinton, as long as you hit the one on the one, you can play whatever else on the other 3 beats. It doesn't matter. And as long as you hit that, but it's that very similar, repetitive, straightforward drumming style. So without that, one, disco has to actually have drummers, which just as a practical matter, I think alters a lot of the subsequent soundscape and landscape, because now disco's not so much a solo kind of poppy sort of act. It implies that there has to be more of a band feel to it.
Yeah. And I'm just going to say, I'm probably going to forward this episode to a friend of mine that plays bass. And I will, if he hears what you just said, Dylan, I'm going to hear what his opinion is on that. I'm very curious.
I only know 2 quotes about the bass. One is that, and the other one is from Victor Wooten, where if you land on a wrong note, you're only a half step away from a right one. Those are the only 2 things I know about bass.
Well, Dylan, I guess you're not all about that bass then, huh?
I am not.
Just had to work that reference in there.
All about that trouble.
Yeah,
but I do
about that trouble.
I guess to keep riffing on the drum idea, I think that does bring an interesting idea of sort of like what would either take the place of disco, or what would kind of be the thing that would sort of transition into that disco-esque kind of feel. And that's, the only other thing that really at this point kind of has that vibe is sort of kind of late 70s Motown, R&B, soul music. Marvin Gaye does Gotta Get It On right after this movie. Like, that's his disco track. So like that vibe is kind of the full band version of what disco kind of blows up into. So I kind of wonder if disco as a sort of genre kind of almost sort of veers back in that direction. Or I wonder if kind of Motown R&B stuff kind of does.
I think
the
it
other
merged.
thing and
I think it kind of
disco.
probably. Yeah, I think it kind of probably ends up merging into that, because if it's like kind of already on the way out and confined to more niche areas instead of it becoming the international sensation that it became. I think that more like I guess you can say well established or more popular genres can probably take some cues from that and incorporate that into what they have going on. So those bigger genres, the Motowns, maybe end up becoming, a little bigger, but they don't have the benefit of having a movie with John Travolta starring, propelling it into superstardom. So it's probably something, as we like to discuss on these pop culture episodes, if X doesn't exist, then something ends up filling the void. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be filled the same way. And, because we're all consumers, we all are going to be looking for music to listen to, movies to watch, things to read. But I think And this kind of lends itself to a broader discussion of, like the centralization of, certain TV and music tastes, because something that I thought of in the lead up discussion to the podcast that I didn't even think about beforehand was the very idea of a music video itself wasn't wholly born out of this movie, but it was certainly heavily influenced by it. And MTV, which we do have an episode on this podcast from a while ago, that actually talks about a different, timeline with MTV. They're started in 1981, and they made a lot of artists go big. And just this idea of a music video where you no longer just have a song anymore. You now also have a full production made as well to really help your song stand out and be aired on TV. If this movie is not as impactful and not as successful, then I think it's delayed too. And this idea probably of, having more of a cultural, I struggle to put it into words, but it's kind of like, the idea of how like we only had four,
it's
cable TV channels.
I think what you're talking about is like an economic concept of entry into the market.
Yeah,
So basically,
cultural
like,
real estate.
like right now, thinking, and we can talk a little bit more about this later. We talked about kind of punk and what's going on with punk, or the idea that you can have three people in a garage, and that can be a band, and that can record an album. Really, you don't actually need a Fred Chateau. But when you get to the point of like, okay, you need to lay down this track, then we need to have a videographer. We need to have like all of the production of putting all of this together. Somebody needs to edit that, all of this other stuff to reach that level. You're competing against people that can do that. And it's a lot harder for somebody to come in and play in those big leagues.
It's a lot harder to make
much bigger.
Yeah, it makes it a lot harder to get your big break. And so I'm thinking of things like, maybe there might be some smaller artists that stayed smaller artists that might have become bigger just on an audio only medium. Or for example, let's say something like, maybe I don't remember the time frame on this, but look, just for purpose of illustration, let's say, Michael Jackson's Thriller doesn't have its iconic movie video or music video that was produced for it. It's still a great song. It's still quite memorable. But I think a lot of the songs that we remember from this time period are so well remembered is because of the fact that they also had a really great music video that just really permeates the international conscious in a way.
Yeah. Thriller was the thing that I was thinking that if that gets delayed, I mean, not only have we lost Bee Gees from Night Fever, we don't get the Thriller video anymore. I mean, this is turning into a nightmare timeline. MTV, certainly when I remember it, one of the things that people got MTV for was so they could watch the Thriller video. We had a party at my school. Somebody wheeled in the big TV, right? We had the big TV. And usually it's for the educational films. When you got to a certain age, they trusted you with the big TV. And we had a big party, and they wheeled out MTV's whatever it was night. And it was the Thriller night, If we don't get that, which I think ties back to what some of us were kind of thinking about. Disco was, it was polished, right? I mean, certainly the consumable, high-end, populist disco that Night Fever promoted and revitalized is this shiny, well-produced thing. The sort of stuff that, other studios were doing in other genres, I guess. The sort of stuff you'd see on Soul Train, right? So it's going to be that sort of music that's going to fill the void. And also something that occurred to me while you were talking, Evan. Travolta's tied into a 3-movie deal. We already know what the second movie is going to be. Stigwood has to get Saturday Night Fever out and in the can quickly. It's a filler because his big movie is coming up in a few months in 1978. That's his next Travolta vehicle. I presume that's still happening, regardless of what we might consider to be a lukewarm Bee Gees-less Saturday Night Fever. we're going to get Grease. We're going to get Grease with John Travolta still. It's got a bunch of music. It's been a successful musical for a bunch of years, since like 71, 72.
Yeah.
Just like anyone, any, you just look on the Wikipedia, people who have been in Grease. Just people who have played Danny. It's extraordinary, It's like,
it's like a career starter.
Right, Richard Gere was Danny. Patrick Swayze, amazing. There's some great music in Grease. It's not disco. We all bought it. Everybody it was going to be, you're the one that I want. Sandy, Hopelessly Devoted to You. They are the same level of quality. And for those of you that don't know, the Bee Gees wrote Grease. I mean, it's sung by Frankie Valli. Bee Gees are already there. We're still getting that sort of music. That, when I say that sort of music, it may not be disco. We're getting polished music coming out. That's still there. And I guess that will kind of be part of the mix for that back end of the 70s until the pushback comes, which I presume is still going to be in the form of punk, hip hop.
Yeah, that's true.
Hip hop getting bigger, obviously, and rock occupying those parts of the charts that they.
Yeah, because Kai, I think you mentioned a little bit in some of your show notes. I saw kind of this, anti-disco sort of thing doesn't end up having a target, anti-disco, but it's still, it could become sort of an anti what ends up taking its place sort of thing. So you had some interesting propositions for what might take its place as the opposition.
I was kind of saving this more for the end because I feel like it's a nice little way to cap everything. But disco's somewhat relatively short-lived era in the spotlight had a very defined end date, which was July 12th, 1979. In Chicago, there was growing dissent about disco music and its influence, and a lot of people felt like it was just all-consuming and it was breathing all the oxygen in the room and there was no room for anything else. And so on that night, July 12th, 1979, there was this disc jockey. I think his last name was Dahl. I don't remember his first name. But he basically orchestrated this thing where you could get a discount on your ticket to the game if you brought a disco album to sacrifice on his effigy, where he would blow up a bunch of these disco records. The organizers of the event, the people who own the stadium and I think who own the teams, one of the two, they were initially skeptical, but they liked the idea of this being a pop culture thing. So they were like, whatever, go ahead. But they didn't think it was going to be a big deal. They thought that this was just this guy, Dahl's brainchild that would just fizzle away. But hey, selling tickets. It ended up being an absolutely massive cultural event where thousands upon thousands of people showed up, and they ended up having a huge explosion of these disco tracks, which then led to people flooding the stadium or flooding the arena. And they had to cancel the second round after that because people were rioting, and it turned into a massive riot. The night became known as the Disco Demolition Night, or maybe it was called that initially, but essentially it marked the end of disco. And I watched an interesting 9-minute documentary on it, and essentially they were saying, like, once this event happened and it permeated into the minds of everyone in the country and around the world, clubs around the country overnight decided they were no longer disco clubs and they transitioned to other things. As such, I was wondering if the Bee Gees hadn't planted the seeds of popularizing disco in the first place, we wouldn't have, as Evan stated, a target for Disco Demolition Night. And that, in turn, would maybe not have led to the evolutionary offspring of disco like house, techno, and EDM. What might have filled its void, and where might music be today if this nucleation site of the Bee Gees producing Saturday Night Fever had not existed in the first place, and therefore the rebellion against it never existed.
Also didn't exist. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, those are very good questions. And I think if Saturday Night Fever, I'm just going to call this Timeline's movie version Saturday Night because that's what I think it's going to be called. If Saturday Night is not as impactful as it is, and as, Helena excellently pointed out, Grease is right around the corner. Well, first of all, I'll just throw this in so that I don't forget. if Saturday Night is not as successful, we thank the Lord. This is like the one good thing that comes out of this timeline. We do not get the absolutely horrible sequel to the movie Staying Alive. It is one of the only, I think it's 3 movies that Sylvester Stallone is involved with. He's the director of that movie, and he basically thought it would be a good idea. He knew nothing about disco, and he's like, you know what? Let's make a movie that's kind of like Rocky Balboa, but just focused on dancing and music instead. Yeah, it turns out about as well as you would imagine. While commercially successful, Staying Alive is, just well known for how bad it is. The Bee Gees do not even want to attend the world premiere of it out of just sheer embarrassment and knowing that it'll probably be negatively received. And this was also put out in 1983. So this is kind of like well after disco is kind of already like back on the decline. So even though commercially successful, because hey, it's Travolta and it's the sequel to a great movie, it's pretty well known for being a very bad movie. I almost forced myself to watch it in preparation for this podcast, but I'm like, you know what? I don't need to put myself through that needlessly. We're good to go there. So we don't have, so this timeline doesn't have the sequel, Staying Alive. I don't think this is necessarily super impacts, Sylvester Stallone's career at all. He's already a very successful actor and producer and director in other roles. Helena, I do think you had an interesting point though in the discussion about Travolta's career, and you already talked about Grease, but like kind of flesh that out a little bit more because I think what you had, some of what you said there was very interesting.
Yeah, so I will mention that, Evan. So just something else I want to mention first is because you mentioned Stallone. Rocky is like this weird ghost that floats around Saturday Night Fever. The first director of Saturday Night Fever, John Avildsen, involved with Rocky. Right, he gets pulled off the movie because he's got different ideas. He doesn't want to film the dancing. Travolta's trainer, Jimmy Gambino, he's Stallone's trainer. Stallone is working out with Jimmy Gambino for Rocky, and this kid from Welcome Back Kotter's turning up to do his training. Stallone's saying, "What else is this kid from TV doing?" There's the Rocky poster in Tony's room.
I was just gonna say the Rocky poster is in there. Yep,
and Serpico and Farah, and like you say, and then Stallone. Stallone trains Travolta for Staying Alive. I mean, he's probably in his best shape ever in that movie. But anyway. That's by the by, but that's like the weird Rocky ghost that floats around it. Travolta's career after Saturday Night Fever is kind of weird. Grease is massive, right? And that's going to happen. And I think, unless anyone's got an opinion on that. But I mean, by the time Saturday Night Fever's been released, I think they're well into production of Grease, and it's going to be a big hit. So that happens.
And also, I'll just throw in here as well. Travolta was already a pretty well-established star in his own right before this movie. Again, when you look into the backstory of this movie, they had to fake calling cards and everything, and like the times for shooting the movie because Travolta had so many fans that like they had to do everything before sunrise for the most part. So most of the scenes were done before then, and by the time all his fans swarmed, they were usually gone. I'm not going to belabor this point because you can just read the article yourself if you're interested, but a lot of little interesting trivia and tidbits for the producing of the movie. So Travolta's already decently established, but this is his big hit. This is what makes him much more of a household name.
He's done Welcome Back, Kotter.
Yeah.
I think
he's done The Boy in the Bubble.
What I think this might be is if this flops, he might become a TV star. He might just be doing that rather than being a movie star.
See, I don't think so because I think Grease is going to save him.
Yeah, I think Grease saves him.
Grease is too big.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that outcome. I think that, and I don't think this is going to flop either. I think this is just going to be okay. So, I think I would agree that his stardom, a star is born, I think, with Grease instead of Saturday Night.
Yeah. Now, presumably, he still does this third movie, which I'll be honest, I've never watched. It's called Moment by Moment. It's a romance with Lily Tomlin. Who's ever seen it? Not me. He does one great movie after Grease in the entire 80s. This is my particular opinion. It's Brian De Palma's Blowout, which I thoroughly recommend. He plays a sound recordist. He's going out capturing sounds at night. He's got his big sound mic and his tape recorder, and he captures something on sound, and he gets drawn into a thriller. It's Brian De Palma, so it's kind of Hitchcock, right? That's great. That's 1981. The rest of the 80s, I mean, what's he doing? He's in Look Who's Talking, and things like that. That's in our timeline. He doesn't. I mean, and that's in our timeline when he was in Saturday Night Fever, right? He gets a revival in '94, right, when he plays Vincent Vega. Vincent Vega, in Pulp Fiction '94, and then you get the second coming of Travolta in our timeline, right? You get Face Off, you get Broken Arrow, you get all of that stuff. If we just knock him down a notch or two, I think his career possibly. I think he's going to look around for different roles, but also maybe he's not saddled so much with, hey, it's the dancing guy.
Yeah.
Maybe he gets different opportunities. Maybe he gets some of the Richard Gere roles.
Yeah,
right?
like an officer and a gentleman was what I was
exactly
thinking.
what I was thinking, Dylan. Right? I was looking it up.
Or more
transitions
importantly,
into kind of an action role, more action roles.
Well, let's hope not,
Yeah.
because if this timeline progresses, maybe, just maybe, this is the better timeline, purely for the sake of, if we torpedo Travolta's career, he may not have enough juice to get Battlefield Earth made.
Oh,
Well, I think he also, and this is like not all that long ago, but I'm just going to say we might, in this timeline, have ended up preventing Travolta's god-awful appearance in Gotti. And in all fairness, I don't think necessarily it was him who sunk that movie. I never saw that movie, but just from what I've read up on it, I think it's more so just that the movie itself was so thoroughly bad.
I think it was
throughout.
just kind of a classic passion project movie that was just not going to be good anyway.
No,
but
no matter what.
I do think you're right.
I think yeah, he doesn't get that role in this timeline. I mean, you mentioned like action kind of thing. Stallone is Rambo. Stallone is like that kind of, he is that guy in our timeline. So if there's maybe a little bit of a more shared real estate there, can we see in this timeline more of a
Like I don't
rivalry?
Either that or them working together like a buddy cop,
or working together as a buddy cop thing. Because I mean, you know what I would like to see? I would love to see the Stallone Schwarzenegger rivalry, but having it be a 3-way fight.
Well, I was going to say, I think Travolta's a little weird because like Stallone and Schwarzenegger are kind of like the bodybuilder 80s bros.
Yeah.
And Travolta, like, he got really, like Helena said, he got the fittest shape of his career for staying alive, but he was never going to be that.
He wasn't going to be that guy. I mean,
hold on.
see him.
I got to
pause everybody. Just Helena's reactions.
Yeah. Dylan is dead right. He's a different sort of guy. Do you know? He's Swayze or Swayze
or Harrison Ford.
Or Harrison Ford. But yeah, Harrison Ford, fine. But Harrison Ford didn't try to get his shirt off, right? Let's say, Roadhouse. It's a great movie. I didn't rate it for years, and that is Swayze. I mean, he's going to be getting some of that action.
Yeah, even in the 90s, I think he might start losing some of these because I'm looking through like a 90s and 2000s list of So after Pulp Fiction, he does Get Shorty. He's in Broken Arrow. He's in Face Off, which excellent action movie from the 90s. He's in Swordfish in 2001. Like these are all kind of this more Bruce Willis-esque action hero roles. Where
it's all the post
and that was the thing that kind of got me thinking about it, because before Bruce Willis starred in the greatest Christmas movie of all time, he was not an action star, and that was a big question as to whether he could be.
And maybe the star of the second greatest action movie, third greatest action movie of all time, Jingle All the Way, is the second greatest Christmas movie of all time. But Mel Gibson, maybe he takes some of these 90s and 2000s action roles from Travolta off the back of like Lethal Weapon, which again, third greatest Christmas movie of all time.
What about Tom Cruise? Tom Cruise becomes
Tom Cruise was the other one I was kind of thinking
in the early 80s, mid 80s time frame.
Yeah, he
I don't
and
know
Mel
if this
Gibson were
necessarily
kind of.
changes. I don't know if this necessarily changes his career trajectory all that much.
Well, Tom Cruise
Because
becomes the action
I
hero of all time.
I was
Yeah.
I was
So
going
would
to
John
say I
Travolta compete
think
for that, despite him being involved in romantic films primarily?
But they're romantic action films, Kai. So you got a point there, and that's I think where Travolta would also move in quite
yeah, I
nicely.
was going to
Yeah.
say I think we see a little bit more of for Travolta in particular, we see a little bit more diversification in what he does, and also because he's not just remembered as the Saturday Night Fever guy. Um, but we also see a little bit more of like because in our timeline we see like these different flavors of action movie. You have the
Mm.
quintessential 80s. Sylvester Stallone is the quintessential shirtless, machete in the mouth, machine guns, brrr, that kind of action
Mm.
movie. Very almost, kind of pulpy, you can say. And then you have more of the, Tom Cruise romantic heartthrob love interest Top Gun kind of action star. You have the, grittier Bruce Willis, Die Hard, best Christmas movie ever, sort of action star. So if we
Harrison
have a
Ford,
Travolta,
like scoundrelly, Han Solo-y type,
exactly the Han Solo, the Indiana Jones,
Indiana Jonesy,
sort of kind of action, movie sort of thing. If we
Mm.
have a Travolta kind of occupying a little bit more of that space, then maybe he's more well remembered for being in kind of the rise of those and whatever kind of action star he becomes, which I think we think he'll be more of like kind of the Tom Cruise love interest sort of action star. That would be interesting to see the body of work that he would be more well known for.
Mm.
But I think the consensus is that he still has a pretty successful career. He's just more well known for Grease probably launching his star, and Saturday Night is kind of seen as a like a stepping stone, like something that was earlier in his career that was essential for paving the way for who he ended up becoming.
I think we're forgetting the most important name here, though, by far. Mel Gibson.
Well, we did throw him in the discussion a little bit earlier.
Yeah,
we did.
Yeah, but just elucidate on that because I think we did kind of pass him over. So,
Well, I just think that Mel Gibson, and I was being facetious when I said that he's the most important name, but I think that Mel Gibson, he has early success in his career, but then he makes a pivot towards making his own movies. And I think that maybe if he had more success early on, it might have led to us not having those iconic films like Braveheart and The Passion of the Christ, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting. Yeah, because Gibson's kind of in that sort of he's kind of like between Travolta and Tom Cruise in terms of like the timing, but he does kind of fit that sort of niche. I wonder if the only problem I see with Gibson is just because he starts out with Mad Max, that vibe is just like totally different from what Travolta's got. But like by the time you get to the 90s, yeah, I do think that could be kind of interesting. Or Helena, you posted an interesting one in the chat just now.
Yeah.
Think of
Kevin Costner. Kevin Costner, guy who does big name, big topic, classy. I mean, Dances with Wolves, right?
Yeah.
Rather than
or even before that, some of his early stuff, like the I can't remember the name of it, but the golf
No
movie
Way
where
Out.
he's the washed up golfer. Like that's a
Oh, yeah,
classic. That vibe is
Tin-
John Travolta
Is
to a
that Tin
T.
Cup?
Sure.
Yeah,
And
it is Tin Cup.
Right?
Yeah.
And Bull
I mean,
Durham
yeah,
and
and
Field
Bull
of
Durham,
Dreams.
Yeah,
Waterworld.
like those are almost Travolta-esque
I think
kind of
so.
roles that you
Yeah.
can see.
Yeah. They're a bit more cerebral, a bit more thoughtful. I can see. I mean, I think I mentioned it very briefly. He was the first film I ever saw Travolta in was The Boy in the Bubble, which is the thing he makes just before Saturday Night Fever, and he's the guy with no immune system. He's a boy who has to live in a plastic bubble, as in that Paul Simon song. And so he has dramatic chops, right? You see that in night. If you take all the dancing out of Saturday Night Fever, you are left with an impressive, albeit grim drama, which John Travolta is perfectly adept carrying. You know, he's a good actor. He can do those roles. So yeah, I mean, I can see him. I can totally see him running around with an Uzi, taking on Euro thugs atop a skyscraper. But I can also see him in any number of Costner-esque type roles. You know, or possibly moving into Pacino's territory. when
That's
Pacino's getting
exactly
older.
I was gonna say.
Right?
We've got Pacino and De Niro doing their stuff,
Yeah,
and
Pacino's a big
Mhm.
forerunner of Travolta, and everybody was saying it. You know, I could just see him doing that.
That's very interesting. I barely heard of the Boy in the Bubble movie, but that, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but just when I very briefly looked up like a synopsis of it, it almost sounds like somewhat of a progenitor of, or it could have been an inspiration for the Truman Show. It sounds like a somewhat similar concept
Takes me back a
thematically.
bit. Yeah,
Thematically, like not,
yeah,
of course, the
a
exact
little.
same, but like I don't know, because I did quick Control F and everything on the various Wikipedias, and there's no link there. But I'm just like,
Mm.
huh, that's interesting. Seeing what some of those maybe not as obvious unintentional ripple effects might have been, for other actors and actresses in their careers. Um, and also, as long as I'm just thinking about it as well, I didn't necessarily do a ton of research on what happened to the main actresses in this movie, in Saturday Night Fever after this point. I do know they have a few roles that they ended up starring in later on down the road. I think they became kind of more TV actresses though. um Interesting bit of trivia
Yep.
for the Travolta's main love interest in Saturday Night Fever. She's 9 years older than him, I think, in this movie. And I had the benefit of knowing that, of course, heading into watching the movie. But I don't think even if I didn't know that, when you watch the movie, I think you can kind of tell that, she's a little bit older than Travolta, and they almost didn't cast her for the role because of
Yeah,
that concern. And so, and she had an accident of some kind, like before, the movie. And so she actually found it kind of hard to keep up with Travolta in the dancing scenes for that. So even though Saturday Night Fever became a massive hit, she, if I remember correctly, in our timeline, she took a little bit of a break after this point before trying to come back because, it was kind of strenuous on her body. I think
yeah.
I think in this timeline, if it's not quite as big a hit or quite as successful, maybe we have a little bit more. Um, Maybe she doesn't take as much of a break, and maybe.
This is Karen Lynn Gorney, right? Just
Yes, yes. I was just
give
gonna.
her a
I
shout
was,
out.
yeah,
Yeah,
I was gonna look up the name because I didn't want to just refer to
yeah,
her as
yeah.
she
The
and her the whole
actress.
time. Yeah, the actress. Yeah, exactly. I don't know. I think that's kind of
Yeah.
interesting to think about what maybe how her career could have evolved past this point.
Yeah, it's a good point because it's a movie that made one person's career, right? No one's going on about actually Fran Drescher's in
Yeah,
it.
that's who
Mhm.
I was gonna say.
Mhm.
Yeah,
She's the
that could
only
be an
other
interesting
name.
one. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
what has Fran Drescher done other than that show?
She's the president of SAG.
Yes, true.
This
But
is Spinal Tap. She's in This is Spinal Tap.
Oh,
okay.
God bless.
Oh,
Yes, she
wow.
is. Turn it up to 11.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hotel Transylvania.
Oh, she is in that.
Okay.
I forgot.
that's interesting.
I know she's
actually.
done some like boy stuff, but like I'm reminded of the Family Guy like Blue Harvest episodes
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
where
yeah,
they
yeah.
you know exactly what I'm
Yeah.
about to say, where the Harrison Ford / Peter comes on and says, "I'm the only one whose career wasn't ruined by this." He's the one person who had a career after.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. All right. Well, I think we've just about discussed almost all that I had in mind with regards to this alternate timeline. I think it's kind of interesting that initially at first we're like, oh man, we focused on like so much of what we lose out from as a result of not having as successful a Saturday Night Fever. But then as we went along in the episode, we just kind of started figuring out, oh, well, there's actually some other avenues and some other possible projects that might have filled the void or might have gotten bigger as a result of this. I do think, just kind of to start wrapping up here, I think one thing that this might have ended up somewhat accelerating is a little bit of the, fragmentation in media and in, preferences and tastes that we see, kind of really reaching its zenith in, now that the 2010s, 2020s, where there's a zillion TV channels. There's, just such a hyper, niche curation of different kinds of dramas and music and everything. Yeah, there's like pop artists that are still broadly popular and some actors and actresses that most everybody knows. But long gone are the days of the 2, 3, 4 cable channels, this sort of mass cultural mass media sort of understanding of things versus the democratization really of media production, of, music production. If we have this, one less massive hit in the timeline, it could lead to either what we could either see it as a continuation of the, pre solidification of culture sort of trends, or we could see it as accelerating some of the fragmentation trends. However you want to put it, I think we've had a really interesting discussion here, and this is one of the first 5-member panels that we've had in quite a long time.
Could I query the panel on one thing?
Of course.
As like a final thing. So
Yeah.
we had two different aspects that we were talking about. One was the effect on the music industry and how it would evolve as a result of this movie. The other one was the effect on the film industry. And by listening to you all, I'm much more familiar with the music industry than the film industry. But by listening to you all, it seems to me that we kind of all agree that the music industry would have been dramatically altered to the point of being almost unrecognizable. But the film industry, it seems like it might be a little bit more tenuous as to what the effects might have been. And we might have seen a scenario convergent with the canonical timeline. Do you guys agree with that, or do you disagree?
Yeah, I think so.
I think you have a pretty good summary on that.
Yeah, I think the music industry would be, by and large, like the long-term trends would be the same or similar. I mean, you'd still see, hair metal in the 80s and kind of grunge and rap sort of in the 90s. But I think, the immediate impact of like, what happens in the 70s, I think, it's just completely different.
Mhm.
And movies
Right.
are because movies, except for, Saturday Night Fever and things like this, movies tend to be kind of more divorced from music, just in terms of the forces and trends of pop culture.
I think it gets kind of to the point I was talking about the economic, like what it takes to actually produce something.
Yeah.
I mean, Dylan's in a band. It doesn't take any.
Oh,
Yeah. No, I think the biggest impact.
But that you can get a group of people together and they can create and do their own thing at a very low cost and be very creative and
Mhm.
adaptive, versus to produce a movie.
Yeah.
You need to have money behind you.
Yeah. I think the biggest change of this is, and we could reference the MTV, episode for this, is I think if you don't have as much of an emphasis on movie production value tied to, the music, that definitely changes things on like a pop cultural sort of trend for sure. This idea that we have nowadays of having a movie soundtrack being almost a standalone product compared vis-a-vis the movie. I would say this, like Star Wars, pioneered the idea of, canonical events and what's canon, what's not canon, this whole trilogy sort of thing. I think Saturday Night Fever really helped set in motion this idea of movie soundtracks being a huge deal. And so without that, I think that you just kind of see a movie soundtrack as a part of the movie, and you don't really see it as a separate marketing tool. It probably ends up happening with some other, movie that would fill that void, but delaying that for a few years, that's really interesting too.
Yeah.
All right.
One thing you've reminded me, Kevin, sorry, just in passing.
Yeah, all good.
You guys may not have known this, but at the time, towards the end of the 70s, if there was a popular movie theme tune, they would remix it as a disco track, and you'd get it on a cheap album, right?
Mm.
Who remembers Disco Star Wars, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think they did
interesting.
Flight of the
Knowledge.
Bumblebees at one point.
Right. If Disco gets let's just say he doesn't get shot in the head by the White Sox Stadium, he just dies with a whimper. I don't think we get that.
Yeah.
I don't think we get any of
Yeah.
those
Like
albums.
like T.S. Eliot
pew.
going out with a whimper instead of a bang.
Yeah.
I think it does. I think it goes out with a whimper. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and I think so. This will be my last thought, I guess. There's, we talked about punk as kind of this one weird undercurrent of reaction to this. And there's another really interesting one that a lot of people don't know about or don't really think about, that directly comes about because David Bowie tries to get in on disco. And that is the sort of mid to late 80s to early 90s blues resurgence. Like, 1993, The Firm, like a lot of the Patrick Swayze movie, why am I blanking? Roadhouse. A lot of these kind of movies have this like 80s blues backing track to it. That all comes about because David Bowie does Let's Dance in response to the disco trend. David Bowie gets probably the third greatest guitar solo of the 80s behind Van Halen on Thriller and Prince's Purple Rain when he hires, at that point, an unknown guy from Texas to fly all the way out and play the guitar solo. And that is Stevie Ray Vaughan, who basically kicks off this entire 80s blues revival when blues basically was battered to death by Led Zeppelin from stealing all the rights to, the original bluesmen from the 50s and 60s. So that's another kind of interesting thing that doesn't happen because David Bowie is not going to be trying to do disco.
That's interesting. Well, I found a way to throw a bomb at the very end of this episode. So I'm just going to drop my very hot cultural take, and then I'll see what y'all think and what our listeners think. I'm just going to say this time I might be made even better because I personally happen to find Led Zeppelin overrated. I'm just going to say Kai was just like, I don't know about that one, Chief, but yeah, that's my hot cultural take.
We've had this discussion before.
Jimmy Page, overrated guitar player. Robert Plant, underrated singer.
Well, I think this is where we'll leave the episode off.
Yeah, we don't want to turn into an argument, right?
We don't want to right at the very end. No, I think we're good. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for tuning in to this tale of woe and whimsy, as it turned out. If you like what you hear, feel free to shoot us an email, tweet, whatever you want. We have our Discord server as well that you can opine on these episodes. And
we might need to create a separate channel just for the Led Zeppelin shot, like just to kind of keep it like
I think we very well just might.
I think
it'll just probably end up
turning all comers on that fight.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's probably just gonna end up becoming a channel where I get abuse heaped on me. But it's a take I will stand by. But anyway, as we like to end off these episodes, if by chance we stumble across a fork in time, what, pray tell, do you believe we should do with that?
Take it.
Take it. Thanks so much for listening.
Thanks for listening to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast. Learn more and provide feedback by visiting our website at www.aforkintimepodcast.com. Connect to us on Facebook at facebook.com/aforkintime or follow us on Twitter at AFIT Podcast. If you want to support the show financially, visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/aforkintime. We hope you will join us next time.